Okay, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So welcome to our third and final Scholarship Across the Discipline panel for the fall semester, where we'll be discussing social media and the internet. And we have some wonderful speakers lined up for you this afternoon. So today we're going to go in order of Chelsea Lamano, a graduate student here at Quinnipiac. And then we'll hear from Professor Philip Simon, Director of Graduate and Interactive Communications Program, and Professor Alexander Halavais, Associate Professor of Communications, Film, Video, and Interactive Media. The presentations will follow in that order, and I will introduce all our speakers, and they'll just follow along in that order. We'll take questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So if you have a burning question at the end of the presentation, just hold those questions, note them down, and we'll take them at the end. Chelsea Lamano graduated from Quinnipiac University in 2011 with a BS in Marketing and a BS in International Business. She's now completing her MBA and is set to graduate in May of next year. She is currently the graduate assistant to the Office of Community Service here at Quinnipiac, and she's also interning at Touchstone Research in Brantford, Connecticut. And today, she'll share her experiences and perspectives from this internship program with you about how social media is changing the way we do business and function in our everyday lives. Our second speaker, Professor Philip Simon, attended the University of Arts, and he obtained a BFA in printmaking. He then moved on to Wesleyan University, where he completed a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies. Prior to coming to Quinnipiac University in 2009, he worked at Yale University for 22 years. He worked in video production, web development, and instructional design. At Quinnipiac, he is director of the graduate program in interactive communications. Professor Alexander Halavais is crazy, cool, and sexy. And in some small communities, they're replacing the verb to Google with to Alex. Alex does not have to write his paper because his thoughts are so loud, and I'm sure you can hear his thoughts at the moment. But Alex Halavais is an associate professor of interactive media and has been here at Quinnipiac since 2008. In his spare time, he's also the technical director of the Digital Media and Learning Hub, which is housed at the University of California Humanities Research Institute, and he's also president of the Association of Internet Researchers. So we'll take the presentations, Chelsea, and then we'll move on from there. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea Lamana, and I'm just going to give you a presentation today on Prezi.com. I hope you guys don't have motion sickness because it moves a little bit. But it's titled The Role of Social Media in the Workplace from a Student Intern's Perspective. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, this is just an overview. I'm going to talk about the different internships I've had and just the experiences I've had with them using or not using social media and if I thought they were successful or not. And then I'm just going to talk about how businesses use social media and just some campaigns that they've had before that I thought were really effective, and then how social media is shaping our lives. So the first place I worked for, it was a marketing agency in New Haven, and I loved the job, and they were really good about using social media. One of the primary things they did was using Facebook. This is because clients would hire them to essentially be their marketing department because they'd be such small companies. They didn't have the funding to hire marketing personnel, so they hired us, and we were the fully integrated marketing agency. So we would manage their blogs or their Facebook pages, their Twitter, LinkedIn, everything for them. So they just told us about their company, and then we managed everything for them. So this company did stuff on Facebook, we wrote blogs for the company, and we also had this thing called Constant Contact. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an email newsletter tool where you can just set up newsletters to go every month, and they just get sent out to everyone, and then on your email list, and then you get to see the statistics as to who opened it, who didn't open it, and it's just a really helpful tool just to see if your marketing efforts are being successful, because you know if they're reaching the people that you're trying to reach. And then we also use this platform called Basecamp, which is like a dashboard. So all of our assignments were on there, due dates for everything, everyone's tasks, just when everything had to be done. You could upload files, and it was really good for sharing files and everything, so you could just work together as a team, and there wouldn't be any overlapping tasks. So I thought that was a really effective way to use the internet. And so overall, I really enjoyed working at this company. I thought they used the internet and social media wisely, so I thought that they were a success in terms of using the internet. Another company I worked for was this past summer, and it's just a small business. They're like, I think 15 people work there, and they do environmental engineering. And they don't use a lot of social media. They use a lot of print advertisements just because they're not really open towards everything. So when I started working there, they did a lot of direct mail. What they would do is they would just go online, look up addresses, put them on postcards and flyers that they had, and then just mailed them out. And I didn't think this was really effective because half of everything that they sent out just got returned back, because you don't know if the address is valid, if anyone's actually receiving it. And then also what they would do is they would just send out emails, but it would only be to the clients that they were working with now. So I thought that there was this whole group of people that they weren't tapping into that they could be getting business from. So what I did for them actually was I went through and I did a ton of research, and I compiled this huge database for them to send out emails to. So at least if they weren't going to use Constant Contact, like I just mentioned, because they didn't want to spend the money on that because they're such a small company, at least they would know that these were valid email addresses on current websites that they could be using, because it's more effective than just sending out direct mail. Because when you send out a mail, you don't know if someone's going to think it's trash and just throw it in their trash pile, and then it ends up in the garbage. So it's a lot of wasted funds when you could be using the internet, which is essentially free. Another thing the company did was use newspaper ads, but we all know that that's not something that's going to stay around for much longer. People read the newspaper, but as the generations are getting younger, everything's online. Like, you check your email and you look at MSN.com, or you can look up the Chronicle or Quad News. Everything is online. So I thought that it would be more effective for them to start moving everything towards online. So when we had their website, we set up a current events section that everyone could look at. But then I said, how are people going to know to look at your website? So I tried to get them to use Facebook, and this is something that they were a little bit reluctant about. They're a company that's been around for, I think, 16 years, and using the internet is not something that's familiar with them. They still, even their filing processes, they have like huge filing cabinets, so trying to convert them over was a little bit challenging. So when I was there, I set up social media sites for them, and I managed them, but after leaving, I see that no one's maintained that. So I tried to communicate to them the importance of it, and that if they wanted to stay competitive, like their competitors that are on social media, I looked it up and I saw that they were on there, and that this company should be on there too, but that's not something that they were interested in right now. And I think that in the future they'll see that direct mail, emails, newspapers, and desperately enough sending faxes is not an effective means of reaching customers. So I think that one day they'll see that what they're doing is a fail. So. And then the company that I currently work at, I really enjoy. What we do is marketing research with children. So they have a Facebook page, and they direct everyone towards that. And then from there, it'll tell you how to join their site called Panel Polls, which I'll talk about in a second. But also they put on ads on Craigslist, because what the company does is like Nickelodeon or people that make products for children contact where I work, and then we do like surveys, and there's questionnaires, and we try to encourage kids and their parents to do these surveys. And in order to get people to know where the site is and to get interested, we put it on Craigslist. And I know it might sound like, how do you know if it's reliable? But we get a lot of people to sign up, and then the incentive for everyone is that they accumulate points, which can then be cashed in for money. And everyone loves money, so that's effective. And so the Panel Poll site is they just sign up, make their username and ID, and they can just take the surveys for us, which helps us which is really good because we get some market research done. But what we use is an EFS panel, which is kind of comparable to Basecamp that the marketing agency I just talked about uses. And it's just another panel where everyone can work together and have all our files on there. And what's really good about it is that you can see where people are accessing Craigslist from, and people that join panel polls, where they're coming from, so you can see where, as far as your reach is. So I think that this company that I work at now is really effective at using the internet and just really optimizing all the venues that it has to make the business better. So I thought that this was a success. Sorry for the motion. So now I'm just going to talk about small social media, how it helps businesses. The biggest thing that it does is spread awareness. When you have a social media page, anyone can see anything that you put on there. So it's great. There's like an info page, especially on Facebook. You can put all this information on there about your product or service, and it really just lets people know what you have to offer them. And then this helps your brand because it makes people think like, I mean, everyone knows what Nike is, but if you didn't and you learned about Nike on the Facebook, every time you saw that swoosh, you would know that that's the Nike brand, and that's something that you can learn from Facebook. And then also on Facebook and other social media sites, you can direct them to other sites, and you can also direct them to your website. And if you have traffic to your website, then that's them directly going to where there's the most information, and then hopefully you can get some leads for your product or service to be sold. Social media also helps you interact with people. A lot of times when companies advertise their products to us, we're bombarded with ads or billboards or commercials, and nothing's really personalized, so it's really targeted towards, I mean, say like chips are targeted to people who snack, but it's nothing specific to you. So on social media, you can like the page, and then you can talk to them, and it's like giving not really a human face because it's a company, but it's human contact, and you can build relationships with the brands, which a lot of people like because it's on a more personal level. Also, the companies can post statuses and encourage discussion, and that's just a way for them to keep up to date with their customers. And I know a lot of places ask people to like their page, so if you like it, they'll offer different incentives. So one could be being charitable. So for every like we get, we'll donate 10 cents to breast cancer. And that just gets people to like it because they want to help breast cancer. And then next thing you know, information about that particular company is popping up on their homepage because the company, I don't know, or like tweeted or posted about it. So that's just advertising to people. And then also, some people like the pages because you can get entered to win like a raffle or something to go to the Bahamas, or you can get free samples. So there's all sorts of ways to be creative to get people to like your page, so you can continuously send information to them. And then market research is what I'm really fond of. Just having social media sites allows you to test new product ideas. So you could say something like, I want to introduce, like say you're Frito-Lay, and you want to say, we're thinking about introducing a new flavor of chips. What do you guys think? So people can comment on that, and you can come up with ideas that you might never have thought of before without having used this social media site. And it just really makes you aware of things that your customers might like, but you never would have thought of. So it's a really good way to do market research, and it just helps you learn. So a lot of times you don't even have to ask customers anything. They'll just post stuff on there, which I'm going to talk about next with a particular company. And it just opens your eyes to stuff that you wouldn't have noticed before. And also it allows you to spy on competitors. So, I mean, you always have to stay on top of your competition. And if they have social media, you can stalk them too. So, I mean, of course it's like a double-edged sword, so they can stalk you, but that's the risk that you take when you put stuff online. So, I think one of the most notable social media campaigns is for Miracle Whip. I'm sure you guys have seen the commercials. They talk about love it or hate it. Are you a mayo lover? Do you like Miracle Whip? And they ask you, are you Miracle Whip? So I'm just going to play a commercial, and I know a lot of the commercials talk about people loving it and hating it, but either way, it's generating word of mouth, and it's genius. So here's this commercial.
I hate Miracle Whip. I'm a mayo person. It's disgusting.
Tastes good to me.
It's gross.
No. Yes.
No.
I'm gonna let him try it.
I do not want to raise my child in a world where Miracle Whip is the condiment of choice.
My family likes it. If my family came over, I would probably go get some just to spite her.
Don't start with me. But if it came between the two, I'm sorry, his family's going to suffer.
So that's just an example.
Ooh, plug it back in.
Sorry. I guess I'll leave that plugged in. That's just an example of how companies, like they said, tell us what you think and you can win $25,000. And where do people do that? They do that online. So that's just another way to direct traffic to their social media sites or their website. But I think it's just an ingenious campaign that they have going, because personally, I'm not too fond of Miracle Whip, but I think that their marketing is really clever. So a lot of what they do on the website is that, or on their social media, Facebook, they just say there's some pretty bold uses of Miracle Whip out there. Care to try any of these? And they're just ridiculous if you look at them. Like drinking Miracle Whip with Charlie Sheen. That's ridiculous. Or Miracle Whip cake. But it's getting word of mouth out, it's getting people talking, and that's just the whole idea of using social media. Just some other questions that they put on there. I can't eat blank without some Miracle Whip. Hate it. Don't even think about adding blank to my sandwich. Or what's worse, like if you read some of these, they're just crazy and entertaining. And then another thing they do is they say they're not for everyone, but tell us why you like us. So this is just another tool that they have to do marketing research. It's perfect, it's free. People love sharing their opinions if it's something that they're passionate about or not passionate about. It's perfect. So another campaign I saw was Corona. Everyone thinks of Corona, they think of like holding a beer with Corona and lime on the beach, you're relaxing. So something that Corona does on their social media is encourage people to take a beach break. So find your beach, take a break, score free stuff. So if you upload pictures of your beach, you can win things. And that's just a great way to get people interacting. And so one of the things they posted on Facebook was, got out of work late and I'm tired. The only soothing thing to reach for, a Corona. And so apparently that's what this guy did. But there's so many pictures on social media sites for Corona because people see Corona and they take pictures with it, and it's just awesome advertising because it's not something that the company has to pay for. So it's essentially getting pictures out for free. Okay, let's not look at him anymore. Okay. So social media is shaping our lives. It changes how we interact with other people. I know in the past, even before I had a cell phone, I thought that revolutionized everything, because thinking about that, I'm like, how can I go back to not having a cell phone? But how can I go back to not having a Facebook? I mean, you can't stalk people, you can't tweet things. It's changed the way that we interact with people, and the generations growing up, I don't think they're going to be as good at socializing as we, I guess, once were in the past, because you can like posts, you can tweet things, you can connect with people on LinkedIn. You don't have to physically see anyone ever. And is that the way that we want to move towards doing things? In terms of finding information, you can go on social media sites to share information. The information that is shared out there is just so personal. And in the past, I don't think that people would have been so personal and put up a picture of their sonogram or said what they're eating or like how long it is until they have class. It's just stuff that you wouldn't think that would ever happen, and people are just sharing this information. So social media has changed how we share information. And then in terms of influencing others, you can follow people on Twitter, like celebrities or famous athletes, and they just have a huge span of influence and a scope on people. And I know that a lot of people make YouTube videos that then become famous, and they get on Ellen DeGeneres, and they get viral. And so it's just, social media has changed everything. It's just everyone can talk to everyone everywhere. And anything that they say has a huge influence, especially with blogs. That's another example. So this one's gonna kind of move a lot, but I just wanted to give an example of the way you used to get a job and how you get a job now, just to close my presentation. So the old way to get a job was actually going to the business physically, I know, to see if the company was hiring. Hand in your resume on a piece of paper, oh my gosh. And then show up for an in-person interview, like face-to-face contact, wow. And then you get a phone call offering you the job, and it's just a good day. So that's the old school way to get a job. That's 4 steps. Of course, I might be like eliminating a couple, you know, like getting dressed and whatever. But now getting a job is just so much more complicated. You have to look for a job online. I know a lot of sites that people use are Indeed.com or Craigslist, or you can use the Quinnipiac Career Services to look for a job. Okay. But then you have to submit your resume online, so no paper copy. Just, it's so much easier this way. And then if they like you and decide that they want to spend maybe 10 minutes, they'll give you a phone interview just to see if you're worth spending more time on. Then you're going to email the employer and say, thank you so much for the phone interview. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Quickly, take down all your inappropriate Facebook pictures, just in case they decide to stalk you on there. And then you might get an email where they're going to offer you an in-person interview, so then you're going to have to physically show up for the interview. I'm sorry if this is like moving a lot. And then email them and say, thank you, thank you, thank you again for that interview. And then maybe they'll email you offering the job, so you won't have to actually see them again until you show up for your first day at work. So I just wanted to demonstrate the difference. 4 steps versus 8. Social media is changing our lives, especially for students getting jobs. Everything is much different now. But I guess these can wait till the end. So thank you.
I'm Phil Simon. I direct the graduate program in Interactive Communications. And Monica Guy is on here. She's my co-author because she did some research for me. She's my graduate assistant and did some great work. She can't be here today because she's home really, really sick. I want to thank her for how she contributed. So I love that photograph I found on the internet, and that is back channel. If you want to know what back channel communication is in a classroom, that's the way we did it when we were growing up. This is the way we do it now, or this is a classroom of the current. Each of you in your seat tweeting away. And so how many of you, while you've been here, while this is going on, has either tweeted, emailed, texted on your handheld device? Come on. Come on. Come on. It's at least half.
What's the hashtag for this?
I was going to get to that. Thank you. Well, just do me, hashtag Philip Simon with 2 L's, and I'll see what you think of this later on. Let me know what you think of the talk. How many of you actually were relaying some information about what's going on here today? All right. That's the future of education right there. So, quick definition of learning: the acquisition of knowledge or skills through experience, practice, or study, or by being taught, and that's my emphasis. And so, you know, you can self-teach yourself to do a lot of things, but the fundamental part of learning that involves teaching is that there's someone else involved. It's a social relationship. That's a classroom, 1905 in Ontario. So here's from Wikipedia their take on media: the storage and transmission channels or tools used to store and deliver information or data. And so way back when, around the time of Gutenberg and before, the printing press was used to create the storage and transmission channel, which was a physical thing, paper that was distributed. So media as a way of distributing information has been around a long time, obviously. That's nothing new. And me being a printmaking major, I had to put that on there. Now, since about the 10th century, when the first schools were being established in Europe and so forth in the Western world, the convention was a lecture, the way things were taught. There was an instructor, a lecturer, a professor, someone of knowledge was going to impart their knowledge onto the students. Generally is one way. There might be some questions, but then the lecturer would then respond and answer those questions. This is a university class in the 1350s. I absolutely love this photograph. I mean, this picture. This guy's talking to this guy, little back channel thing going. He's kind of looking at this person. There's a female in this picture is kind of neat. This guy's asleep. So essentially, there's a lot of different activities going on, independent of paying attention to the lecturer. And just, you know, and the term pedagogy actually arose out of the university lecture system, meaning Greek word meaning paid, Greek word paid meaning child, and I think I'm pronouncing this right, agogos, meaning leader of. So essentially it's a leader of, and that the lecture, that term is a leader of it. The pedagogy has since changed and not so much leading as just general methods and models and philosophy of teaching in general, but that's the origin of that. Here's a lecture that we see today. And there's really no media going on here. It's just a guy up the front giving his lecture. You can kind of tell, you can date this because see, no one has any laptops. Everyone's looking at him. No one's looking down or texting. So you can kind of date this just by that phenomenon. That was this University of Oxford, by the way. So in Wikipedia, there's an interesting comment about the lecture that goes through lecture. Though lectures are much criticized as a teaching method, universities have not yet found practical alternative teaching methods for large majority of their courses. And So the question is, will social media be able to change that? Here's Hartwick College, circa 1960. There we have some media. There's a couple of televisions with that lecture on the television. It's kind of interesting. I imagine he's going to roll some video at some point. It's probably later than 1960, given the age of the television, circa 1960s. But everyone's paying attention. He has their attention. Helsinki University and of Technology. The use of media, no, this media is stored. What happens is I don't know if you've seen systems like this, the professor will come in ahead of time and write on these huge chalkboards, and they slide up and down and all around. So you can prepare 5, 6 chalkboards at once and slide them up in and out as he needs them, and then write as he goes along. So now this is more contemporary, because you see there's a laptop, there's some sort of computer monitor on the screen, but this idea of the rotating chalkboards has been around a long time as a way to exchange media and to store it and give your information. But still, he's in the front and he's conveying to a group. This is a little more update, because now we have a data projector, probably showing some sort of PowerPoint. And people here actually, I think, are writing notes as opposed to their computers. This is more like the situation today, not as bad, where everyone has a computer. So now we're deeply into into media or social media or computer technology integrated into lecture hall, for better or for worse. It can be a great tool for taking notes. More often than not, like in this case, people are interacting with the world and with nothing to do with what's going on here at the moment. So as a result of social media, what we have, as I referred to earlier, is this back channel. What's going on is that because people can communicate with each other in a way which is not as obvious as passing a piece of paper, like we did in the left when we were growing up, and more often than not, those notes were not about what was going on in class. I doubt that note said, boy, isn't this interesting, or what a terrible class. And the pair on the right are probably not texting about the class. But there are classes where they're using the back channel, taking advantage of it, saying if the students are going to have this communication going on while I'm up here, let's take advantage of it and add to the learning experience. So you end up having this kind of situation where everyone is talking to everyone else in the classroom, because the instructor has said, okay, amongst yourselves, now exchange information, either at certain key points or free-for-all while it's going on. So even the traditional lecture model, social media starts playing an interesting role in terms of this back channel kind of chatter that's going on while the lecture's going on. It's still a live lecture. There's still physical people in the room. But of course, you can have a lecture which is not physically in the room. And you could give a lecture to thousands of people at once. So this might be a screen, typical screen where you have the presenter on the left, and he's usually in video. You have his screen there, which is about his subject matter and would be his PowerPoint, so that hasn't changed. But then you have some other stuff going on, which is kind of new to the lecture environment. You've got everyone who's there in attendance, which you could see people before, but now you know, oops, sorry. Now you know who's coming in and out. You've got a chat under the slide there, which is in the class, being held in the chat, and so it's being recorded. Then you have a Twitter Connect. So you have two channels going on. One, the chat in the class using the technology, and also Twitter at the same time, either about the class or a Twitter feed about some other subject completely. So this is what the lecture can evolve to, have multiple back channels of things going on. But the fundamental concept of the lecture hasn't changed. It's for someone in front imparting knowledge, but now everyone's talking about whether it's worthwhile or not. The other fundamental learning technique that's been around for centuries is this concept of the seminar. It's a function of bringing together small groups for usually recurring meetings. Each time it could be on the same subject or a progression of subjects relating to the topic, and everyone present is requested to actively participate one way or the other. Now this, for me at least, personally, I prefer to the lecture method. It's much more interesting and engaging. Seminars can be really boring if the instructor is not, or the professor really isn't good at engaging. But the structure really reaps of being social in terms of constant contact between the participants. The instructor in yellow is now of equal size, so they're actually requesting information and giving out questions and so forth. And there's this constant communication going on, which, of course, could be in person. Here's a seminar from, this is the famous ceramic of Plato's Academy from Pompeii, 1st century BC. And this is a seminar. Probably, maybe, I don't know, a seminar in the sense we think, but it's probably based on Socratic method, where these gentlemen are standing around exchanging ideas, posing questions, getting answers. So the seminar concept has actually been around much, much longer than the concept of the lecture. And if you read these points, and these are Monica Guy, who was in our program, was actually a classics major at Cambridge. So she did some research on this, and well, this is actually her field, and she wrote this quick explanation of the Socratic method, which really feels like social media would be so perfect. So sharing debates around conflicting ideas. So aren't we doing that on Twitter all the time? Group discussion and participation in an environment of equality. And the internet, everyone's sort of equal. There's no prominence. You're taught participants have to think critically and argue, and treated questions are more important than the answers. So here's a seminar without any electronics, except there's a slide in the background. And that's very similar to the scene we saw in the Pompeii ceramic before. But you could also have a seminar online, and this is a picture of a hangout, where you could have multiple participants, small group, really conducting an online seminar. So the concept of the way the seminar works continues, social media just allowing it to happen in different ways, and people all over the place. So as I'm going through this, think about evolution or revolution. Professor Richard Yurtik from UMass Amherst is very much into designing, and he has instructional material on how to make an interesting interactive seminar. And he defined responsibilities, encourage cooperative learning, keep participants engaged, mechanism reporting back. Now, you could look at that description and think, oh God, I could do that really wonderfully with social media and technology, but in fact, it's what he's described in the classroom, but using some time. So the teaching method really hasn't changed. We're just moving into a new way of doing it. Now, key to part of the whole question of evolution or revolution is the notion of a common environment. And this sort of description or definition of social learning from 2001 by Conti and Paolucci is that it's a process of learning caused or favored by people being situated in a common environment and observing one another. Now, the observing can take different forms. What I find is interesting is the notion of a common environment. So typically that's the classroom. It always has to be the classroom, because if people are going to get together to learn socially, they have to be in a physical room. Or if near each other in physical space, actually. But now you can have hybrid learning environments, excuse the typo, where in this case, this was the New York Times, about different techniques of using social media, is that, so they have a discussion going on using Twitter and other tools in the class. You have both an in-person experience and a social media experience at the same time in discovering. So Don Clark, who's sort of a self-proclaimed guru on social learning and technology and learning, has made these 4 points. I'm running a little late here, so I'll quickly go through them. But he wanted to know, are social media tools just as good in a learning situation as in common environment they are replacing? So then I add, the common environment is a medium that allows learning methods to take place. In other words, you have a room, it allows people to come in, the learning method might be a lecture, it might be a seminar, it might be using tools in the tool, multimedia, overheads, whatever. But can social media become its own common environment, carrying current traditional methods, learning methods? Once again, a typo, I just finished this up. So the idea is that social media become a room in itself, an electronic room. And if it did that, we're still going to use the similar methods of exchange. Perhaps it's lecture, perhaps it's more seminar model. But can social media foster a new learning method? So here's a seminar on steroids, basically, and it really can only happen in sort of a virtual environment, where you have clusters of people learning together, but they're communicating with other clusters. We have teachers who are back-channeling with teachers, and students back-channeling with students from other clusters, and so forth. So could you actually engineer this kind of a learning experience that takes advantage of the small group, but expands it to include maybe dozens of groups around the country on a similar topic? So the question is revolution or evolution. Actually, this is the slide I want. So these are my last slides. So to conclude, ask yourselves, with social media on top of how we learn and what we learn, will we learn better? Will we learn more? Will there be an explosion of new ideas or innovation as a result? Will non-connected students be illiterate? In other words, if you don't have a computer or this connection, will you not be able to keep pace in terms of reading and understanding what's going on? Will the teacher-student dialogue fundamentally change as a result? And finally, will teachers no longer be necessary? So think about those, decide for yourself if it's evolution or revolution. I tend to think it's an evolution at this point, but I wouldn't discount at some point the fundamental way that we learn from each other could possibly change. Thank you.
So thank you all, as I see people leaving, but thank you all for being here on a Friday at 3 o'clock with at least no alcohol visible in the room. I certainly appreciate that. And on Veterans Day, these are actually my grandfather and his two brothers, all of the Marines back in the Bronx at home on leave from the Pacific Front. I'm going to be tweeting this. I give presentations all the time, and I got sick of the back channel and people talking without me being able to respond. So each of these slides actually sends out a tweet. So you're welcome to respond there. I can't do it live so much, but if this is working, each slide that comes up with its own tweet. I'm going to be talking about, the title of the presentation is Open Analytics and Social Fascination. It's a fairly abstract talk. If you want something more concrete, sign up for my class next semester on social media. One of the advantages, it's also very prospective, right? This is work I haven't done yet. It's stuff that I'm interested in right now and that I'll be working on over the next months and years and decades. And it's not stuff that I've already done for the most part. And that's really nice because if I'm wrong, too bad. You know, it's kind of like no pressure here because I can just talk about stuff. And I'm also a little more passionate about it than I would be about stuff that I've already done. So the title, as I said, is Open Analytics and Social Fascination. But really, that's an arbitrary collection of words, and all of them are important, but I don't know how they stack up, and all of these are equally valid. So I'm going to try to hit those 4 words without, in some kind of order, and try not to pull a Rick Perry. Actually, I can't. I have them in big letters here, so I won't forget the 4th. I'll remember what it is. So when I was younger, I was a competitive judoka. I played judo, and I actually was lucky enough to work with some of the best teachers of judo, both in the United States and Japan. This was not one of them. Hopefully you recognize him. If any of you have trained in judo, if you have not trained in judo, you probably think he was distracted by his camera woman, who is a former Miss Universe winner, or perhaps he sees a journalist he needs to eliminate. But that's not really what he's looking at. He's actually demonstrating a technique for the 2 kids behind him. And the technique is, in judo, you talk about kazushi, you talk about unbalancing the opponent. And one of the things my instructors taught me, and that has stuck with me for reasons completely separated from judo, is that where you look is where you go. My slides are getting ahead of me. Where you look is where you go. And so your natural tendency when you look at these things is to, when you're against an opponent, you want to throw them on the ground, is to look at them, right? You don't want to turn your back on the opponent. But actually the first thing you have to do is look away from them. You look at where you want to send them. And so my talk today is about that. It's about the ways that you can make people look at things and therefore go in that direction. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about metrics and analytics, but along with all of this is this idea of fascination. Not fascination as in, you know, Spock, how very fascinating, that kind of fascination, but this idea that what you look at you actually get attached to, and it carries you along. This is an idea that came out of cybernetics, especially during the 1950s and 1960s. Cybernetics at a very basic level, and I'll come back to what cybernetics really is, but at a very basic level, is this idea of feedback, right? You do something, you see what happens, you come back around, you change what you do. And so a lot of people said, oh wow, cells seem to behave this way, even humans seem to behave this way. And so there was this big kind of jump during, especially the 1950s and 60s, around this idea that cybernetics could help us describe a whole range of things. And kind of through that's been ditched at this point, but kind of through the back door, we've been starting to see these metrics showing up that are supposed to help us adjust our own behaviors. This is actually right outside my front door. I live down in Manhattan, and over the last 3 weeks, all of a sudden, all the stoplights had these countdowns, which they didn't have before for crossing Broadway. So why do they do that? Well, it's because it changes your behavior, and people have done research about this. You know, it's supposed to, and it does reduce car-pedestrian conflicts. That's the term they use, car-pedestrian conflicts, which sounds very nice, but it reduces people getting run over. And believe me, in New York City, there are a lot of car-pedestrian conflicts. So when you put this in an intersection, people actually, even if you're like, oh, yeah, whatever, 3, I'm still gonna cross. Even if you do that kind of involuntarily, it changes your behavior. If you take a menu and you put caloric counts on it, on average, people consume 250 less calories over dinner, just by putting the calories on there. You don't have to tell them anything about it, you just have to list it. And all of a sudden, because they have had their attention drawn to those metrics, they change their behavior in an interesting way. Now, it turns out that cybernetics works really well until you start to think about social behaviors, because we pay a lot of attention to the metrics themselves. And so you have this period in which people talked about second-order cybernetics, cybernetics of cybernetics, and thinking about how humans are really hard to deal with in terms of feedback circles because they recognize when they're being measured and they do things about it. This is something we've known for a long time in the social sciences. We try to do what are called unobtrusive measures. So an obtrusive measure is something like what the Quinnipiac poll does, which is calls someone up and says, if you had to vote right now, would you vote for Michelle Bachmann or Rick Perry? And people who may have never even thought about that question before in their entire life will still come up with an answer. In fact, someone did some studies, and a lot of people have done lots of studies surrounding this, but if you call people up and ask them about their insurance choices, their behavior over the next few months in choosing insurance will change. We talk about these as push polls in politics, but even outside of politics, as soon as you start to ask people questions, their behaviors change. There was a group of studies, oh man, I am too slow for my slides. There was a group of studies during the 1920s called the Pain Studies, which is a great name for any kind of studies, but it was the Pain Fund that was funding them, about how movies affected children. And they wanted to know, for example, if you watched a violent film, what it would do to you. And they did a whole slew of really interesting unobtrusive studies. For example, they instrumented children's beds. So they found out at night when they were sleeping whether they were having nightmares because they could see if they were tossing and turning. So they would send them to a really scary movie, and they didn't ask them, were you scared, or how do you feel about this? They checked that night to see how well they slept. And so this is kind of an unobtrusive measure. But if you know that measures affect the way people behave, you can actually create measures that change the way they behave. So more than half of doctors have prescribed something that doesn't work at all, a sugar pill. Why? Because it does work. It turns out when you prescribe sugar pills, it actually solves some things because people believe that it does. It changes their behavior and their belief. And is this an ethical concern? About 3/4 of doctors in turn say no. They believe that because it is creating an actual change in people's health, it is an appropriate thing to do. And so I'm suggesting that not just a sugar pill, but that we should make clear what our measurements are and design them in such a way that it changes behavior in ways that we like. This is not, by the way, my Rate Your Professor. I would never show you that on the big screen. But it is, well, if you're reading my tweets, you know whose it is. What's interesting about this, and I pick on this instead of our own student-teacher evaluations, is what it's rating you on. It's rating you on easiness, helpfulness, and clarity. And also, of course, hotness, the chili pepper, which this is Madeline Albright, and she didn't get any of those, which I think is really unjust. But it's rating you on those things. Now, I'm okay with being rated on helpfulness, maybe, although I would never get a good rating on that, and clarity, and for those of you who are my students, you know I would never get a good rating on that. But easiness, if you put these in as a measure, if it's something that you measure, it's something you're going to try to do. So you're going to try to be easy. and you're going to try to be hot, I guess, but there's only so much you can do with that. Part of the problem with that is when you grade students, when you evaluate students, this large question, which is, should you get an A for effort? How many of you who are students right now think you should get an A based on your efforts in a course? Don't be shy, some of you do. I disagree. So here's why I disagree. If you grade people for their effort, it says they are your ideal is for people to have to exert a lot of effort in the course. In other words, if that's your metric, you are going to aim to make things harder and harder and harder. My ideal course is where people felt it was entirely effortless, where they learned a great deal of material, but it wasn't hard. Over the last year or so in my courses, I've replaced grades with badges. This is not ideal, of course. I'm testing it on my students, and they have been very patient with me in many cases and less patient in others. But this is an aim at getting people to use authentic assessment. That is, what do I want to aim for people to do? I want them to be able to do the stuff that they want to do when they get out. I actually think I should be assessed on that as well. Not how hot the students thought I was, but rather whether they can do something that they couldn't do at the beginning of the course. So this is an example and something that I'll be developing continually, and again for undergraduates beginning next semester, of trying to create an assessment system, a metric, an analytic, that actually matches what we're trying to do. Western Governors University, which is an online university, has taken this to perhaps a more extreme degree. And they actually have people that are professors who teach, but they do not do any of the assessment. It's a completely separate job, which makes a lot of sense, right? I give you a grade based on how I think you do, based on what I taught you, is kind of that doctor-patient conflict there in some ways. What would happen if the professors in this room taught, and then someone else checked to find out whether the students had actually learned what they wanted to learn? It's a really interesting model, and the faculty I talk to often are really scared about this. They don't like the idea of losing control over the process of grading. But I find it a very intriguing and very convincing way to think about what assessment really means. To give another example, one that's social media, this is actually, I am going to talk about my research a little bit. This is from a paper called Do Dug Diggers Dig Diligently, which was published in Information Communication and Society. And I looked at a metric that's on Dig, which looks at people's comments. And if you like it, you give it an up finger. If you don't, you not vote it down. To see, as people joined, how their votes went and whether they could learn to get better votes on the site. And they did. Now again, this metric is not designed for that, right? This metric is designed so that people can see what the better comments are, but the end effect of it is people learn how to create better comments. So it's this really interesting idea of a metric that wasn't designed for that, but people become fascinated by this rating right beside them, and they are then change their behavior to match that. Okay. So analytics is a fancy word, and it's used in a lot of different ways. I come from a program where we teach a lot about web development, and so the natural go-to on this is something like Google Analytics or Web Analytics. This is something that takes analytics at a basic level is different from metrics, although I like to wrap them all together. Metrics measures something, and analytics takes a bunch of different measurements and combines them in interesting ways to get you an interesting kind of result. And so you get a basic metric, which is how many hits is my website getting, and then you can combine it and say, where are they coming from, why do they get there, what if I give them 2 different versions of the site, where do they go when you do that? So you get a lot more kind of rich data detail. But that's not really kind of where analytics comes from. If you go to the supermarket, that's where you see an extraordinary amount of analytics. How do things get on the shelves at the supermarket? One element of those analytics is the supply chain. How do we make sure that things get to where they need to go? And that's the oldest form of analytics in business. But also kind of how do you decide, for example, that Heinz Spotted Dick should be put next to Dundee marmalade. You decide that by looking at your receipts. Any of you who use a club card, all of that stuff goes through and they decide what things you tend to buy together. They look at how people walk through the supermarket. They look at what people buy. They decide which coupons you should get based on that data. So there's an amazing amount of rich data behind any kind of retail experience. Kohl's, for example, has kind of increased their profits by 50%, and they blame analytics for all of that. I'm kind of running behind, but analytics have also been used kind of famously in sports to go from gut feeling to a very clear kind of quantitative analysis. And they've also increasingly, especially over the last year and a half, been used in learning. So professors and above that level, that is schools, for example, are tracking on very detailed behaviors of students to find out kind of what you're doing and, more importantly, finding out what works. Who talks to whom? If you look at the network of who talks to each other, for example, on a Blackboard site, and afterwards decide who learned the most in that course, you can start to shape the behaviors so that it increases the learning within a particular course. And as I will argue in a moment, I think it's really important that it's not just us tracking you, that is us as faculty tracking students, and this expands across the board, but that you should have access to all of those analytics. In terms of assessment, I think you should see everything that we see, and that you should be engaged in the process of creating those analytics. This is not us telling you what you should be doing, this is you telling us what you want to accomplish, and us letting students, helping students accomplish those goals. This has also happened in terms of health. I'm wondering, any Fitbit users in here? I have one. I have a dead Fitbit that I managed to step on, but I was using for a while. And last week, Jawbone announced their Up, which tracks how you move throughout the day. So it gives you an ongoing record of how you move, how many steps you take, when you're moving, whether you go upstairs or downstairs, how you're sleeping, whether you're getting restful sleep, how many hours of sleep, and you're allowed to kind of track on that and record it. It can integrate with things like a Withings scale and find out whether your weight's gone up or down, and there's a whole range of devices that are coming out over the next year that will do this. Just a quick note here, actually there's another group called Massive Health that's doing this as well. You'll see that you can take pictures of the food you eat. Nobody has quite perfected a device that notes what you're eating as you're eating it, but this gets pretty close, that you take a picture of each of your meals and then can code that over time. Clout, anybody know their own Clout score? Okay, 1, oh wow. Okay, so if you look at surveys of students, a lot of them say, for example, that one of the things they want out of life is to become famous. This was not true 10 years ago, this is a change. People actually care about how many Facebook followers they have, or Twitter followers they have. And so being able to focus on that score changes the way we behave. We behave in ways that are different because we know who's following us and when. What happens when we aggregate those at the social level? And we have a very good example of this in terms of clocks, right? Clocks are a great example of a metric that we've aggregated at the social level in order to kind of assemble and do things now in a course on a university campus, for example, but traditionally in, for example, the monastery, so that everyone could know what they were doing during the day. It's a metric that socially we can plug into, a very basic metric, but one that works. This is a map of the moods in the US over time, aggregated from Twitter posts and then coded, so that you could track over time that people are really pretty depressed on Monday and are really pretty happy on Friday. Do you feel happy? Or do your tweets reflect that happiness? I mean, this is kind of an obvious result, but it also shows that Californians are happier, and you can watch the happiness kind of on Friday wave across the US. You have actually a time-based thing, so you see it all turn from red to green as you get to 5 o'clock across the US on Friday, which is pretty cool. If this all sounds a little scary, some of you may remember Total Information Awareness, which was a project that was DARPA funded, and they quickly, because of the PR result, kind of went, no, we didn't mean it. Of course, they're still doing the same thing, which is aggregating huge amounts of data from across the web, because a lot of what we do happens on the internet now. So that data is already digital and already able to be aggregated in some sense. So what's the result? That's scary. I'll admit, I'm scared by that. So what do we do about that? One way we can battle that is to make sure that, I don't think we can get rid of those metrics. I don't think we want to get rid of those metrics. But one thing we can do is make sure those metrics are open and usable by all of us. There's a kind of a movement called the quantified self, which are a lot of people that are measuring basically what they do on an hour-by-hour basis. They look at their schedules, they plug it all together, and they use this to analyze their selves and improve themselves. And so I've given one example. Health is a great way of doing this. People who have ADHD are doing this in interesting ways. But so are people who are just working and trying to increase their own personal efficiency. One of the most interesting projects for that is called OpenU, and it's basically a bunch of hackers and techies who like to kind of make use of this data and are creating ways of extracting this data from these devices so that we can use them not just as companies but as individuals. And there's one project from the guy who leads this called OpenCoder. It's this great thing where he's tracking his Fitbit as he's working on programming. So it's built into his word processor, his coding processor basically. And it finds out when he gets frustrated with a piece of code. Because he gets up and walks around, he stops working on it for a bit, he starts to fidget, and then it looks at the parts of the code where he's really just cooking, where he's getting into the flow. That's really cool from an individual basis because you could find where in the code you have problems in the code that seem odd. But from a social level, it's amazing. You can have all this data uploaded into a social site and find out where thousands of coders working on the same piece of code are running into the same problems. And it's an amazing sort of thing to be able to do in terms of a coordination process. So back to cybernetics. We're doing a lot of Play-Doh today. Cybernetics is not necessarily about machines. It was first used by Plato in the Republic to talk about self-government. It means a steersman for a boat. So when Plato uses this to talk about self-government, I want to go back to talking about it in terms of self-government. I think if we can own these metrics and these analytics, it leads to new kinds of democracy and new kinds of thinking about society. Right now we're doing it wrong, and there's some basic problems with black boxes. We don't really know how Google works. Even if we think we do, we don't know how Google works. And it's kind of essential to black boxes that you don't understand all the analytics, but it has to be possible for people to learn how to use those analytics. And so even if we can't, few of us know how to build an operating system or want to, but if that operating system is open enough that we can do that if we want to, that's a good thing. And so I'm going to argue that we should do the same thing with our analytics. They should be open and accessible to us, even if not all of us will use them or change them. In conclusion, give me a moment and focus on your breathing. How many of you just took a deep breath? I didn't tell you to do that. What you focus on changes. And probably you feel a little better for that deep breath. If you're normal and human, taking a deep breath has just oxygenated you and made you feel better. What you pay attention to changes. This is something that across especially Eastern philosophies we've known for millennia. And I want to make sure that we can craft what we pay attention to in order to change us as a society and make us better. Thank you.
Thank you very much for three very wonderful presentations. So we'll now open the floor for questions, comments for our presenters.
Alex, you were talking about how Twitter behavior changed. You said how the comments got better than the ratings. My question is, do those comments get better only in that context, or do their commenting get better when they comment about it?
Yeah, no, very, very explicitly in that context. So within that particular community of practice, there were a set of expectations for what counted as good, including things like liking Obama. So, I mean, in a very specific way, there were things that were good from the perspective of that community. So you could see that in two ways. One is groupthink. It's the evolution of groupthink. But again, if you have the community designed right, then the metrics can help to make that community work better.
It seems to me that why I mentioned that in our courses, often the things we learn in the courses don't translate to other courses because we're not clear about that. So in the context, they're being better. When we move to a diverse context, it doesn't change.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So, problem.
Yeah. But it's a design problem, right? It's something you have to, if you think about it, I mean, part of this is pay attention to the metrics is really the message rather than, it's that metrics matter, and so pay attention to them is kind of the basic lesson, yeah.
So have you designed learning analytics? Are you talking about learning rubrics or affective things or other kinds of behavior?
So people are talking about it in a lot of different ways. I'm interested in making the assessments open, and so I conflated the two here as well. So the badge system is talking about authentic assessment, right? The analytics piece right now is often not open. That is, people are not as concerned with opening it up. And often it's talking about things like traditional social analytics and doing social network analysis of discussions, for example, to see what kinds of discussions are productive and what kinds are not. No, almost always quantitative. The analytics piece usually means quantitative. And so traditional social network analysis, often things like log analysis, log file analysis. So yeah, so I'm interested in bringing that qualitative piece in. But
what did you mean by open? You're not,
When I say open, I mean open to the participants, right? So right now, when you do for example, most of these network analyses are then not opened up to the students, and in many cases, the students don't realize they're being watched in that way. And so I want to make sure that they know about that. I also want to make sure that if they have particular interests, they're able to affect the design of those metrics in certain ways.
Well, Greg Latowska has written a book called Exodus to the Virtual World. And he argues that phase migration is an indicator of attention. So whatever you're looking at is, and he happens to argue that, as the title of the book suggests, that people are simply going to begin migrating to virtual worlds in games because it's more fun and it's more pleasurable, and the real world is somewhat an unfortunate place. And I'm curious of how you might respond to that very simplistic argument, at least my simplistic recounting of it, but in the context of what you're researching and your use of analytics.
So I guess, and this is going to be a simplistic answer, I'm afraid, but I guess my simplistic answer is that the virtual real dichotomy is highly problematic. And so, for example, if you're looking at someone's Foursquare metric, using Foursquare badges as a metric, are you really looking at the virtual? You're looking at where people showed up physically and maybe how they interacted in real environments. Now, you happen to be looking at that in a electronically mediated sense, but it's very difficult for me to see that as a clear divide. And I think whatever divide might have existed there is decreasing over time and not increasing. So I think that you could say that that would certainly be the case in terms of perhaps games and perhaps obviously virtual environments, but that is a special case rather than the general case. That's an ill-considered and rapid response, but that's my gut response.
Yeah, what you stated makes me think of is whether the mental health of people who are doing this exodus or going to this world is getting better. And in a sense, maybe in the 60s, where exodus was to drugs and alcohol, not alcohol, but drugs, and the, sort of escapism to get away from the real world, which was so lousy. So in a sense, is it becoming a dependency for some people who go there and spend so much time that they are happier there, but are not confronting their real lives? And so is it really a difference? It just becomes another opiate in a sense. And so I think that's the larger question: how does it fit into the context of what being happy is? And and some people really are addicted, and it's a major issue. And then they say they're happier. A lot of people on drugs say they're happier, but it might not be a proper way to conduct their lives.
I was just thinking about, you were talking about transparency of assessing, evaluating, and how important it is, and I was thinking about your rate my professor thing, because I find that so problematic because it often is people who either have a terrible experience or love the teacher, and I've heard a lot of instructors kind of blow it off and say, oh, they're just, students that, didn't get a good grade. And I was just thinking about how it would be so helpful to instructors to have the evaluations for everyone, but also for the students to be able to see the evaluations. Because I think when students are picking classes, they see some instructors who have really negative evaluations for many years. You wonder, do they get this feedback? Does it matter to their teaching? Can they use the feedback to enhance their instruction or get feedback for it? And it just seems like it's something that would be really helpful and beneficial to the teacher and the student.
Yeah, I have actually of two minds on that. First of all, this is the first campus where our teacher evaluations by students were not available to students that I've taught at both the University of Washington and at SUNY Buffalo. Those, not the individual comments, but at least the scores were available to all students, which made sense. Again, this idea of metrics being available, if they're producing the metrics, I think they should be available to students. That said, I read an interesting article, and I'm afraid I'm not sure if it's published yet or not, but so I won't I refereed it. So, but it was a study of students who read the manipulation was manipulating people's Rate My Professor screens. And students read that screen first, then saw a videotaped lecture, and then took an exam. For the manipulation, those who had higher Rate My Professor scores, the students learned more. They assumed that the professor would be more interesting and therefore paid more attention to them. And it was the same lectures, but if you manipulated the Rate My Professor score, students learned more from the higher Rate My Professor scores. So I guess the lesson we take from that is we should just give ourselves really good fake Rate My Professor scores, because ethically, it'll actually causes our students to learn more. I mean, it's a very, very odd sort of relationship. So that's why I'm of two minds, because I do think they should be open, but it's very clear that it affects the mindset of students going into a course.
There's one that just there. Did you have a question?
No, he answered it.
Phil, thinking about your virtual seminar space, I wonder how much we forfeit for not being able to witness body language and interact in a richer way like that. What do you think?
Well, don't assume that you won't be able to see each other, you know, in that seminar space. That I mean, a lot of students hesitate. You know, we teach a lot of online courses in the ICM program. A lot of students like the idea of being in physical class, seeing everyone, seeing the, you know, there's something to be that presence. And I don't know that seeing people on video screen can sort of, you know, take care of that completely. But in that space there, you might be seeing people, maybe not. I mean, it'd probably get too crowded if you're seeing everybody. That's a very good question, and I think it raises how far we can really go with online instruction, which, you know, that's why I think in the elementary school level, for instance, you're never going to have online instruction where students are in a classroom with a teacher. And as you get further and further through your education, you tend, what's evolved is that you can get further away from the real class experience. Where I know even at Quinnipiac, there's a resistance to putting undergraduate courses online. In the graduate school, it's like, hey, no problem, let's do it. And so I guess it means as you get further along in education, you're better able to adapt to not having that experience. I don't know if it's this, I don't think we can tell yet whether that's really, you know, like, you know, with Alex, how we assess the outcomes of in-person experience versus online to compare the outcomes there. And that's the interesting studies that I would like to see is like, you know, apples to apples, are the outcomes the same? Doesn't mean you enjoy it anymore or less.
And no evidence, but I suspect that, some anecdotal evidence, but I suspect that, that in a physical classroom, men talk too much. And so actually that sort of, yeah, the men talk too much and women don't get a word in edgewise. And so, you know, just because you don't have that there doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it's different. And that good or bad is very difficult to
yeah, I mean, the back channel, you know, the example that I've seen that's concrete in terms of that experience is that when I first taught an online course back in 2004 here, because they were campus students in the round, I had 2 sessions on campus. And one of the students who was great in the online discussion and really contributed was this very meek, shy young woman sitting way in the back of the class and didn't say a peep when we had a discussion in class. And I don't know, you know, if I would have had the opportunity to draw her out. That wasn't my role necessarily, but in the online. So you're seeing a lot of that in terms of people combining those worlds. It's allowing people otherwise not feeling comfortable in the class to be able to speak out. One could say, well, yeah, but maybe we're encouraging them not to think about how to speak out more. Maybe that's what they should be learning. So there's that two-edged sword to that.
I think also, though, that when you have classes online, it's good because you don't have to go to class, and it allows people to speak out that are really shy, but it can also be overwhelming to manage if you're going on a discussion board and you have to have this many posts, or you want to be able to follow this thread or this thread, and where to go. It's just a lot to have to look at. And then, I know, like a physical class, you show up and you go to class and you go home and you do your homework, but for an online class, you need to be able to check the Blackboard or the discussion board or everything all the time. That's why it helps to have a smartphone, and if you don't have one, you're kind of SOL.
So I have a question for you, Chelsea. Because you gave such tremendous examples of, success and failure using social media as a market had. But right at the very end, in conclusion, you seem to suggest that maybe it can go overboard. And I think you were making a comment about possible effects on social face-to-face interactions of your generation. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Right. I think for businesses, social media is great because it allows a business that's really large to become a little bit smaller and communicate with people. But I think for students and just people in general, I think that we're moving towards it not becoming okay to rely on social media. I know I think I went to Olive Garden one time, and I'm sitting with my family, and I look over, and there's this like couple or two women, or I don't know who is there, but they're sitting and they're eating, and they're just on their phones. They're just sitting there, and like that's not what it should be like. If you go out to dinner, you should be speaking to each other. So I think that it's given a lot of people something to do because they can now be on social media all the time, but I think it makes it so they don't find things to do with each other. So does that answer your question? Or?
And can I follow up? So then when you, but do you think people maybe are in that mode temporarily, and then maybe in the workforce, and maybe other students want to come in, you change because it's not appropriate anymore, and so you can switch in and out of this kind of mode?
I think that everyone's becoming reliant on it, and I don't think anything's going to change.
But can I ask a follow-up on that? Do we also assume that we want to merge our social interactions with the classroom too? I'm thinking back to my own exercise that I've experimented with in my class, where I sort of create the Facebook activity for them. And more than 80% of the students were very hesitant to engage in the Facebook activity. And when I told them and got their responses, a lot of them said, that's my private life, that's what I do in my spare time. It's not something that I necessarily want to do. So do we sometimes make certain assumptions about what exactly should be, as opposed to creating the rules for ourselves as we go along?
I think so. I think that like people want to keep it separate because that is their personal life, but I don't think that you can. I think.
Yeah. Well, I think, so I have a Facebook account, I have a LinkedIn account. And so Facebook, what will happen is a student will say, do you want to be my Facebook friend? And I turn those down. Because Facebook, it's like, the appropriateness of me inviting a student over to my house, to give them a ride, going out for a drink. So I said, well, that's kind of the space where, but LinkedIn, I immediately will become their connection because that's a professional space. I want them to see what I have to say professionally and the other people I know professionally as an opportunity. And they have to draw that line somewhere. So Facebook, I can understand why the students would be a little cagey about that.
I'd like to go back to your list of questions that you had at the end. You said something about, will disconnected students or unconnected students be illiterate? And I just jumped up because our worry is usually the opposite, are connected students illiterate. So I'm wondering what you're talking about when you say illiteracy, and this connects to what you were saying before about elementary school, high school, undergrads, graduates.
Right.
Where do we pinpoint the literacy? Right. Are they not less educated in some sense of that classroom that you were historicizing?
Right. So there's all kinds of literacy. I mean, Don Buckley and I were debating what visual literacy is for our committee on the paradigm stuff. And so what do I mean by that? Think of it this way. Imagine a student who doesn't have access to computers or electronics, somehow is, and everything about their education, starting in kindergarten going forward, is about being connected, understanding how to use the devices and get online. And if they don't have that connection, will they be left behind? Use a phrase I'm not crazy about because it's images, anyways. So to the extent, will they become sort of technologically illiterate? Will they maybe not be able to maybe read as well because the tools aren't there? I mean, imagine going way forward. I mean, they're giving out iPads in all kinds of schools. Apple is actively marketing to education systems, wooing them, flying them out to California. So these schools will order huge batches of iPads and just giving them out. So what about the kid or the underprivileged school somewhere where they don't have access to that stuff? Are they going to be starting missing out on the learning experience? So it was an extreme to say they become illiterate, but you could think, now on the other hand, in California or across the country, I forget what the name of it is, there's a school system where that's private, fairly, that doesn't allow computers. And the one in Silicon Valley, there's some very prestigious, high-powered people working at Google and other places to send their kids there. because they've chosen for their students not to have the computer experience. But, so you could take it the other way as well. I'm just, I guess it has to do with the dependency on the technology for learning. Are we going to get to the point, if it's not there, or we become too dependent, are we actually going to affect our learning? And the extreme would be that in some sense, depending on how you want to define it, we become illiterate.
Well, can I just follow up on that? The question is a question of education, technology and education somehow meeting. At least from my experience and most of the people I talk to, we do find that students now know less in some sense and write less well in another sense. And I put that down to their reading less. Now again, why are they reading less? If they're obviously reading on the screen, but they're not reading newspapers or books or whatever it is. So I think literacy is a big problem for education in general.
Well, I think sorry about that. I say, you know the etiquette in movies, how you turn everything off when you go in now and stuff. So we do change our behavior with these things depending on the context. Well, I give an example of my own son, who one day I was at a desk. He was next to me, and he was using a computer. He's 4th grade. He starts touch typing, and I go, "Where'd you learn that?" "Oh, technology." And it's like I'm a bad typer. I could have taken it growing up, but then it's just. It's like learning penmanship. They learn keyboarding in some schools, and all my kids know it just from its part. It's not an option anymore. It's not even a requirement. You just do it. You go to technology and you learn to touch type. So in one sense, they're learning to use the tools better than I did. But they're reading. The reading. I mean, there's tons of educators trying to figure that out. And a lot of people say it's experience. They're talking about going to the happy place of the virtual world with the games and so forth. We're just not reading as much, or reading differently, or reading. What kid can really want to sit down with a long novel when they look at all the short form stuff of blogs and little things all the time? We get little chunks, So
they are actually lining up at midnight to get the next Harry Potter novel. So, it is reading different. It's also a matter, I think it's hard to draw the correlation. Note that we're testing students on the 5-paragraph essay, which they write extraordinarily well, the one they have to write for the SAT. They're really good at multiple choice questions. So, part of it is our assessments force them to behave in certain ways. And that it's not just the technology, it's the technologies of what we're using to figure out whether they're smart. And then we complain when they don't read things or they can't write an essay. We haven't asked them to, and we haven't judged them on their ability to do that for the most part.
Let me just quickly add, and we can get some other questions. The assessments are forced teachers and administrators to think differently. The whole Bush era assessment focusing on two kind of models of testing for mathematics and reading and leaving everything out, forced schools to adapt to the point where there was even some scandals where the teachers and administrators were gaming the results to get better scores for the school because that's all that counted.
Okay, so are there any students from the hands that are up? Okay, so let's hear it. The back there.
I just wanted to comment on the reading situation. I am more likely to read news online than I am to pick up a newspaper. So I see how that is being effective on me. But now I also I used to be able to read novels it was my job. I would read them all day long, and now I can't sit down for more than a half hour and read a novel. But I get all my news online. So it's both. I see both of them being affected, and I'm in the middle, and I think that's where most people are, rather than the extreme. I could read novels online.
That's exactly what I was going to say, actually. Just about, I think in a way, as a student, I'm reading more and getting more information through being online. I wouldn't necessarily ever go down to, a store and pick up certain newspapers or pick up certain things, but, I go on Facebook every day and I get my Google homepage and get the CNN news and get the New York Times news, and I will for Quad News, and we're constantly posting articles on people's personal sites. So even if they don't want to go to our website, if they click on their Facebook, they'll say, "Oh, there's a new Quad News article today." So I think in a way that I'm reading more more in that sense because of being online than if it wasn't.
But I have to dispute, you know, when you're going through a newspaper, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different areas. You know, you're flipping the pages, you're getting political news, you're getting environmental news. Are you only following the things you're interested in? Are you only getting the news that you're interested in? There's a whole other world out there.
Like some of the every section of the newspaper.
But you have to flip through to get the comments.
Well, when you go to Google News.
I want to go back to the question of assessment, and I think somebody had brought up secondary education. In this state, every time the mastery test comes out, every time the SAT test comes out, it's become a marketing tool for school districts, for real estate agents. And I find that the school systems are now being battered by all these, you know, the standings, you know, the Simsbury, Avon, you know, in their little group, South Windsor, or Manchester, and East Windsor in their little group. And I find, the question is, and I hear it from teachers, they're now teaching to these assessments. Are they now to the point where I think they're abandoning teaching kids how to think and how to apply things? They're now teaching, we've got to make good on these mastery tests. We have to make good on these SATs. The teachers are going to be assessed on how well the students improve on these other standardized tests. And I'm wondering, in teaching to the assessment, it is changing behavior, but I think we have to be very concerned on how we're doing that and what we're losing in the process.
I think that, like, personally, I took the SATs and I didn't study, and I did fine, but I know people who studied like really, really hard and still didn't do well. So I think that you're either going to do well in the SATs or any mastery test or you're not. And so I think the best way to teach students is to just teach like a normal course of school, because I think that that's where you pick up the tools. Like, that's where you learn that I comes before E except after C, or that's where you learn like how to answer multiple choice questions or do proper grammar. So I think that the best way is just to teach not to a test. I think that's wrong, because you do well on the test, but does that mean that now that you can't do something else that you need for life?
They're spending so much time, and they're almost bragging about how much time they're spending. We're going to remediate this problem on the reading test. We're going to remediate this problem on that. It's become like, you know, where's your high school in the football standings? Where is your school in the mastery test standings? It reflects on the town. It reflects on real estate values. It's taken on a whole new emphasis that seems to be getting farther and farther away, but actually teaching, and it's hitting districts that are at the lower end or are not making what people consider progress. And I think some of those kids, you know, they're not going to afford a tutor for SATs. And I just wonder, you know, things are getting skewed. Yeah, you want your kids to do well in these tests. It's supposed to be measuring. It's almost now the test has become the reason to teach.
Part of my argument is that teaching to the test is nothing new. The problem is not teaching to the test. I disagree, actually. I mean, if you ask Google, and if you ask Google, how do you get a good Google ranking? Go to their site. They tell you how to get a good Google ranking. Make a really interesting site. That's not true. You get a good Google ranking by going out and spamming links to the so it's just not, you know, they want it to be true, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. So I don't think you get away from teaching to the test, which means we just have to have way better tests.
I'm saying, you know, when they start doing that at the secondary level, it just seems, I wonder what priority of getting a good test result versus actually teaching their kids how to be productive in the post-secondary work.
Yeah, and it's not really a technology problem. I mean, the technology allows us to assess on a massive level very quickly, but it really comes down to good teaching, and I think you're always going to assess schools one way or the other, and they're always going to be ranked. The question is, what are they ranked at? And how do you rate that progress is the major issue that's sort of fallen apart. Let's go ahead and take another question.
Okay, so we could just take one last brain question. I've seen your hand fall off, so final question.
I guess I'm a little bit troubled about metrics linked to attention, driving behavior, and I suppose this is somewhat glib to say, well, that could be sort of manufacturing consent. And if you go back to Socrates in the Meno dialogue, we think of him walking the slave boy through the geometric proof. And that is a way, I suppose, of focusing attention and changing intellectual behavior. But there's something that seems much richer about that as a possibility, as opposed to what marketeers may be up to. And if you could just speak to if there's a worthwhile distinction about maybe looking at the Socratic method versus merely driving ad revenue.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not saying that we should. So here's my argument is the Brin argument, which is we don't get rid of the metrics. And so we should try to affect them the best we can. I think what you're saying is really an argument over whether the quantification of those metrics is bad. And I am one who thinks that it's possible to do quantification in better ways, in ways that reflect a more qualitative sort of assessment. I think that, again, changing the and it's not manufacturing consent, it's manufacturing attention, and that's our job. That's our job title. It's getting people to attend to things. We profess in order to get people to attend to things. And that can be done in various ways for both good and evil. And so the major argument I'm making is that we should do it for good, and the best way to do that is to put that in the hands of the students. Socrates would disagree. So in that respect, at least, I think it is an argument in part against the Socratic method, because the Socratic method is, I think, you've used the manufacturing consent. I don't think you could quite do that to Socrates, but it is that. It's a conversation. It's a teleological conversation. It's a conversation with a very specific endpoint that is not that is deliberately concealed from the other conversant. And so I think probably my argument is against that, although I'm not really sure.